So it's a great joy to be back at Yale. I just taught a class for the first time in 6 months, which I haven't forgotten how to do. But it is a special pleasure to be here today and to welcome a friend and an inspiration, Amory Lovins, to Yale and to our community. Amory, as many of you know, is the co-founder and currently chairman and chief scientist of the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a leading independent, market-oriented, I think Amory likes to call it a think and do tank. So not just producing ideas about how the world might work better from an energy and environmental point of view, but really trying to step out and lead the way on some of those new technologies. He's been an inspiration to me for a very long time. Some of you will know that nearly 40 years ago, Amory launched a concept called the soft energy path, in which he helped focus the world, and really for the first time in a systematic and thoughtful way, on the opportunity for energy efficiency as a way of addressing rising energy demands and a rising set of prices around energy. And I think that focus on the demand side of the equation, prior to that, everyone had thought the answer to energy problems was more supply, was a breakthrough in thinking. And Amory has, over the intervening time, been an advisor to companies and governments across the world, more than 50 different countries. And within our country, many companies and other entities, including the Departments of Energy and Defense. He's won more prizes than I can even name in an introduction, but including the Blue Planet Prize, the Volvo Prize, the Onassis Prize, the Nissan Prize, a MacArthur and Ashoka Fellowships, the Heinz Prize, the Lindbergh Prize. I won't go on. He really has had an extraordinary career in breaking new ground in terms of thinking, and he has done so in a way that brings analytic rigor and fresh ideas to many topics. He's written or co-authored or co-edited 31 books and over 400 papers. His latest book, well, he has two that have been recently of interest. In 2004, he wrote Winning the Oil Endgame. Some of you I know have read that. And more recently, and really just released, is Reinventing Fire, Bold Business Solutions for the New Energy Era. And it's really that topic, how we reimagine our energy future, that is here today to talk about and to address. It's a great pleasure to have him hosted by the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy, as well as the Business and Environment Club at the Yale School of Management and the Center for Business and the Environment at Yale. Amory's visit is supported by the General Electric Foundation and the GE Sustainability Leaders Program. Amory's going to talk for a number of minutes and then take questions. If you do want to ask a question, please wave and we will try to get you a microphone. Let us know who you are. And all of you have signed in, and if you haven't, we're going to, by implication, have you signed in, meaning you have agreed to be taped, because we are videotaping this and running it live on the internet. So if anyone does not consent to having their voice or vision on that internet, please go out and, I guess, watch from the outside. So thank you all very much again, and it really is a pleasure to be able to welcome Amory. Special thanks again to the GE Sustainability Leaders Program that helps us bring practitioners and thought leaders here to Yale and to really make this institution a forum for debate over the challenges and opportunities that we face in implementing sustainability across environment, energy, and economic dimensions. So with that, let me say thank you again, Amory, and the podium is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dan, for your wonderful work at Yale and for now the people of Connecticut. After that gracious introduction, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say. The energy debate that keeps coming at us in the media and in politics, if clearly framed, would ask something like, would you rather die of oil wars or climate change or nuclear holocaust or perhaps all of the above? But what if we could choose none of the above? What if we could make energy do our work without working our undoing? Could we have fuel without fear? Could we reinvent fire? Fire, you see, made us human. Fossil fuels made us modern. And now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. This has now become possible. In fact, it works better and costs less than what we've been doing so far. So let's explore how to make that change. 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning every year about 4 cubic miles of fossil fuels, the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. Those fossil fuels have built our civilization, created our wealth, enriched the lives of billions. Yet their rising costs to our security, economy, health, and environment are eroding, if not outweighing, their benefits. That's why we need a new fire. Switching from the old fire to the new fire means shifting two big stories, oil and electricity, each of which releases now 2/5 of fossil carbon, yet they're distinct. Our electricity comes less than 1% from oil, but nearly half from coal. 3/4 of our oil fuels transportation, 3/4 of our electricity powers buildings, the rest of both runs factories. So very efficient vehicles, buildings, and factories save oil and coal, and also natural gas that can displace them both. But today's energy system is not just inefficient, it's also disconnected, aging, dirty, and insecure. It needs refurbishment. By 2050, it could become efficient, connected, and distributed, with elegantly frugal autos, buildings, and factories, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. We can eliminate our addiction to oil and coal by 2050 and use 1/3 less natural gas while switching to efficient use and renewable supplies. By 2050, this could cost $5 trillion less in net present value than business as usual, assuming that carbon emissions and all other externalities are worth zero, a conservatively low estimate. Yet this cheaper energy system could support a 158% bigger U.S. economy, all without oil or coal or nuclear energy. Moreover, this transition needs no new inventions and no new federal taxes, mandates, subsidies, or laws, and running Washington gridlock. Let me say that again. I'm going to tell you how the United States can get completely off oil, $5 trillion cheaper, with no act of Congress led by business for profit. This energy solution is going to be designed and driven from the C-suite, not from K Street. It's going to use our most effective institutions, private enterprise co-evolving with civil society, sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. And whether you most care about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or national security, or environmental stewardship and climate protection and public health, reinventing fire makes sense and makes money. General Eisenhower reputedly said that expanding the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by encompassing more options and more synergies. Reinventing Fire therefore integrates all 4 energy-using sectors: transportation, buildings, industry, and electricity. And it integrates 4 kinds of innovation: technology, design, policy, and business strategy. Those combinations are a lot more than the sum of their parts, especially in creating deeply disruptive business opportunities. In truth, we would save a lot more than $5 trillion. For example, America burns oil costing $2 billion a day. But our analysis, which I will describe, left out its hidden costs, paid not at the pump, but through our taxes or incomes. Those extra costs are at least $4 billion a day, or $1.5 trillion a year, in 3 roughly equal parts. The first $500 billion a year is sucked out of our economy mainly by OPEC's monopoly pricing, which our oil dependence makes possible. The second $500 billion a year is the market price, the market value of oil's price volatility. That whipsaws our whole economy. For 40 years now, every recession has been preceded by an oil price spike. But just the daily yo-yo of prices imposes cost and risk on every user of oil. The third $500 billion a year we pay to keep military forces ready for Persian Gulf interventions. That is about 10 times what we pay for oil from the Persian Gulf, and it rivals our total defense spending at the height of the Cold War. Oil is also finite. The Pentagon is preparing to need no oil, and the rest of us should too. So we ought to get off oil just to enhance national security and save money at the fuel pump, even if its hidden costs were not twice its pump price, bringing its total economic cost above 1/6 of GDP. Plus, we haven't counted this yet, any damage to health, environment, global stability and development, or our nation's independence and reputation. Where to start? Well, our mobility fuel goes 3/5 to automobiles. So let's start by making autos oil-free. 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car is caused by its weight. And every unit of energy we save at the wheels by reducing weight or drag saves 7 units of fuel at the tank. For the past quarter century, though, epidemic obesity has made our 2-ton steel autos gain weight twice as fast as we have. But today, ultralight, ultra-strong materials like carbon fiber composites can make dramatic weight savings snowball and can make autos simpler and cheaper to build. Lighter and more slippery autos need less force to move them, so their engines get smaller. Such vehicle fitness then makes electric autos affordable because their batteries or fuel cells get smaller, lighter, and cheaper, so their sticker price will fall to about today's level with far lower driving costs. These innovations can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of Victorian steel stamping and engine technologies to the steeply falling costs of 3 mutually reinforcing technologies: advanced lightweight materials, manufacturing, and electric propulsion. Sales can grow and prices drop faster with a temporary fee-bate, that is, rebates for efficient new cars paid for by fees on inefficient ones. In its first 2 years, the biggest of 5 European fee-bate programs tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency. The resulting shift to electric autos will be as game-changing as shifting from small improvements in typewriters to the dramatic Moore's Law-driven gains in computers. Computers and electronics, of course, are now America's biggest industry. Typewriter makers have vanished. So vehicle fitness opens a new automotive competitive strategy to double oil savings in 40 years, and that in turn makes affordable the electrification that can save the rest of the oil. Leaders will be laggards, just like hybrid cars, only faster, because hybrids represent only one learning curve, not 3 synergistic ones. America could be leading this next automotive revolution. Currently, the leader is Germany. Last year, Volkswagen announced 2013 production of this 230-mile-a-gallon carbon fiber plug-in hybrid. And BMW announced 2013 production of this carbon fiber electric car. They confirmed that its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries, and their CEO said, "We do not intend to be a typewriter maker," because he can look across Munich to where Olympia used to be, making excellent typewriters. Audi claimed it's going to beat them both by a year. Now, even faster and cheaper manufacturing technologies than those German firms are currently using made this carbon fiber carbon cap in 1 minute 7 years ago, and you can tell from the sound how extremely stiff and strong it is. I'm going to pass it around. Don't worry about dropping it. Tom Friedman whacked it as hard as he could with a sledgehammer without even scuffing it. It's tougher than titanium. Now, these techniques can scale to automotive speed and cost with aerospace performance. And when we do that with all our automaking, it'll save 4/5 of the capital needed for automaking, and it will save oil equivalent to discovering 1.5 Saudi Arabias or half an OPEC by drilling in the Detroit Formation, a very prospective play. Those negabarrels under Detroit cost about $18 a barrel. They are all-American, carbon-free, and inexhaustible. The same physics and the same business logic also apply to big vehicles. In the 5 years through 2010, Walmart has saved 60% of the fuel per ton mile in its big fleet of heavy trucks through smarter designs and logistics. Just the technological fuel saving in heavy trucks can rise to 2/3, and when combined with triple to quintuple efficiency aircraft, we can end up saving about $0.9 trillion net present value. And today's military revolution in energy efficiency will speed all of these civilian advances, much as military R&D in the past created the internet, GPS, the jet engine and microchip industries. Now, as we design and build vehicles better, we can also use them smarter. This is a graph of traffic congestion with the morning and evening rush hours, and if that were an electricity load shape, how much IT-enabled demand response and pricing and smart grid would we throw at it to flatten it out? But by not yet doing that for road traffic, we are wasting many billions of dollars a year in idle people, idle vehicles, and idle roads. But now, 4 powerful techniques can cut needless driving. We can charge real-time driving costs per mile, not per gallon, use smart IT to enhance transit and empower car sharing and ride sharing, allow lucrative smart growth real estate models so more people are already where they want to be and don't need to go somewhere else, and use IT to make traffic free-flowing. Together, those 4 proven methods can give us the same or better access with 46 to 84% less driving, saving another $0.4 trillion, plus another $0.3 trillion from smarter use of trucks. You start adding these things up, and pretty soon you're talking real money. So 40 years hence, a far more mobile U.S. economy can use no oil. Saving or displacing each barrel for just $25 rather than buying it for upwards of $100 saves $4 trillion in present value, counting all its hidden costs at zero. So to get mobility without oil, we can first get efficient, then switch fuels. Those 125 to 240 mile a gallon equivalent autos can use any mixture, now unknowable because we don't know how the competition will play out, of electricity, hydrogen fuel cells, and advanced biofuels. Any one will do. We have 3. Trucks and airplanes can realistically use advanced biofuels or hydrogen, or trucks could even burn natural gas, but no vehicles will need oil. Any biofuels the U.S. might need, just 0.3 million barrels a day, made 2/3 from waste, could be produced without displacing cropland or harming climate or soil. Our team speeds up these kinds of oil savings by institutional acupuncture. That is, where the business logic is congested and not flowing properly, we stick little needles in it to get it flowing, with partners ranging from Ford to Walmart to the Pentagon. I think most of the 6 sectors we need to transform are already at or past their tipping point. In fact, 3 years ago, mainstream analysts started to see peak oil not in supply but in demand. And Deutsche Bank even forecast that world oil use will peak around 2016. In short, oil is becoming uncompetitive, even at low prices, before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. But electrified autos don't need to add new burdens to the electricity system. Rather, when smart autos exchange electrons and information through smart buildings with smart grids, They add flexibility and storage to the grid that help integrate variable solar and wind power. So electrified autos make the auto and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately. And they converge the oil story with our second big story, saving electricity and then making it differently. Those twin revolutions in electricity promise more numerous, diverse, and profound disruptions than in any other sector as 21st century technology and speed collide head-on with 20th and 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Changing how we make electricity, though, gets easier if we need less of it. Today it's mostly wasted, and efficiency technologies keep improving faster than we apply them, so the potential savings keep getting even bigger and cheaper. But as efficiency gains in buildings and industry start to outpace economic growth, America's electricity use could start shrinking despite the electrified autos, which really don't add that much because they're very efficient. We can do this by reasonably accelerating existing trends. Over the next 40 years, buildings can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, saving $1.4 trillion net dollars with a 33% internal rate of return. The savings are worth 4 times their cost. And industry can accelerate too, doubling its energy productivity with a 21% internal rate of return. But there's an even more disruptive innovation we call integrative design that can boost these savings further and often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how our 2010 retrofit is saving over 2/5 of the Empire State Building's energy, remanufacturing its 6,500 windows on site into super windows that pass light but block heat, plus better lights and office equipment, reduce the maximum cooling load by 1/3, and then renovating smaller chillers instead of installing bigger ones saved $17 million of capital costs that helped pay for the other improvements and cut the payback to 3 years. My own house high in the Rocky Mountains at 7,100 feet, where it used to go down to minus 47F, minus 44C, and you can get 33 days of continuous midwinter cloud, is another interesting example of integrative design. It helped inspire 32,000 European buildings that need no heating but have roughly normal construction cost. They don't have to look like this to work like this. They can look like whatever you want. Inside, we have grown 39 banana crops. This was just photographed last week. You can see crop number 37 here, 38 and 39 are elsewhere. That's with no furnace. There's no heating system. This house in 1984 was saving 99% of its space and water heating energy, 90% of its electricity, all with about a 10-month payback. Today's technologies, which we've just retrofitted, are even better. How much better? Well, we're figuring out by commissioning some software that's measuring 300 data points every 20 seconds. The trouble is the monitoring equipment seems to be using more energy than the lights and appliances we're measuring. But this design approach works well in any climate, including eliminating air conditioning up to at least 115 Fahrenheit or 46 Celsius with lower construction cost and better comfort. Or a house model on mine was built in Bangkok and produced superior comfort at normal construction cost with 90% less air conditioning energy. I think probably about everybody in the world lives somewhere between the climate of Bangkok and Old Snowmass. Now the key is integrative design that gives multiple benefits from single expenditures. For example, this arch in the top has 12 functions but only 1 cost. Integrative design can also increase the $500 billion of conventional energy savings in industry. For example, 3/5 of the world's electricity runs motors, half of that runs pumps and fans, and those devices can all be improved, but the motor systems that drive them can also save about half their energy with a 1-year payback by integrating 35 improvements. First, though, we ought to capture the bigger, cheaper savings that are normally ignored. For example, pumps, the biggest use of motors, move liquid through pipes. A typical industrial pumping loop was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. This also shrinks the pumping equipment and its capital cost. Now, this isn't new technology. It's about rearranging our metal furniture. So what does such savings mean for the electricity that's 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the coal burned in the power plant to the flow out the pipe, there are so many compounding losses that only 1/10 of the energy actually gets through as delivered flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards into compounding savings, and every unit of flow or friction we save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel, cost, pollution, and global weirding back at the power plant. And also, as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper. Our team has lately found such snowballing energy savings in more than $30 billion worth of industrial redesigns, from data centers and chip fabs to mines and refineries. Typically, our retrofit designs save about 30 to 60% of the energy with a 2 or 3 year payback. Our new facility designs save more like 40 to 90% with a lower capital cost. Now, needing less electricity would, of course, ease and speed the shift to new sources of electricity, chiefly renewables. China leads their explosive growth and their plummeting cost. In fact, the photovoltaic module costs shown here have just fallen off the bottom of the chart. Solar and wind power are marketplace winners today. Europe has now over 1 million new renewable energy jobs. The big winner, Germany, has more solar workers than America has steel workers. Already in about 20 states, private installers will be happy to put those competitive solar cells on your home's roof with no money down and beat your utility bill. Those kinds of unregulated products could ultimately build into a virtual utility that bypasses power companies, much as cell phones bypassed wireline phone companies. That sort of thing gives utility executives the heebie-jeebies and venture capitalists sweet dreams. Half the world's new generating capacity since 2008 has been renewable, the majority lately in developing countries. In 2010, renewables, except big hydro, got $151 billion of private investment, and for the first time they surpassed the total global installed capacity of nuclear power by adding 60 billion watts just in a year. That happens to be the same capacity as the solar cells that the world can now make every year. Last year, 68% of Europe's new capacity was solar or wind. In fact, solar was the #1 capacity addition, quarter of the total. Gas was next. Wind was just edged into third place. In contrast, global orders for coal and nuclear plants are fading because they cost too much and they have too much financial risk to attract investors. Indeed, in the United States, none of the 34 proposed new nuclear plants has been able to raise any private capital, despite 7 years of being offered 100+% subsidies. So how else could we replace our coal-fired power plants that produce about 45% of our electricity? Well, efficiency in gas can displace all those coal plants at below just their operating cost, and combined with renewables can displace all the coal plants over 23 times at less than their replacement cost. But once is enough. And actually, in the past 5 years, 2005 through 10, we don't have the 2011 data firm yet, but in those 5 years, coal lost already 1/4 of its share of the U.S. electricity market to cheaper gas efficiency and renewables. And that transition is now well underway. We're often told, though, that only coal and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7 while wind power and photovoltaics are variable and hence unreliable. But actually no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when a giant coal or nuclear plant fails, you just lost 1 billion watts in milliseconds, often for weeks or months and without warning. Grids, though, routinely handle that kind of intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And grids can handle the forecastable variations of solar and wind power in exactly the same way. Hourly simulations show how largely or wholly renewable grids can deliver highly reliable power when forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and location. This is true both for continental areas like the US or Europe and for smaller areas embedded within them. For example, the isolated Texas grid summer electric loads can get a lot smaller and cheaper with efficiency, or smaller and less peaky, I should say, with efficiency. And then we can install wind power and solar power. And these are actual data, so you can see how variable they are. But even at times when they produce in total too much or too little electricity, they can still be matched to the load via ice storage air conditioning, smart charging and discharging of electrified autos, and unobtrusively flexible demand, even with, in this case, at least 86% solar and wind, variable renewables. The other 14% or less can come from dispatchable renewables like geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, or feedlot biogas burned in existing gas turbines. So we can make all the moving parts fit together by arranging this choreography properly. And some utilities are already integrating variable renewables in exactly this way. 4 German states in 2010 were 43 to 52% wind powered. Portugal was 45% renewable powered, Denmark 36. And now European experience is supporting a transition over decades to largely or wholly renewable electricity for the entire European Union. Variable and flexible resources then can reliably serve steady loads, not in the traditional way, giant fossil fuel to nuclear plants, but with newer resources that meet even better the classical definition of so-called baseload plants. That is, they're the ones with the lowest operating cost, so you dispatch them whenever they're available. America's aging, dirty, insecure electricity system has to be replaced by 2050. And whatever we replace it with is going to cost about $6 trillion net present value, whether we buy more of what we've got now, or new nuclear build and so-called clean coal, or centralized renewables, or distributed renewables. But these 4 futures, even though they cost about the same, differ profoundly in their risks around national security, fuel, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. For example, our over-centralized grid is vulnerable to cascading and potentially nation-shattering blackouts, not just the sort of thing you saw in Connecticut, but on a very much larger scale and duration, caused by solar storms, by other natural disasters, by terrorist attacks, physical or cyber. But that risk disappears, and all the other risks are best managed with distributed renewables reorganized into local microgrids that normally interconnect but can stand alone at need. This would cost about the same as business as usual, but would maximize national security, customer choice, entrepreneurial opportunity, and innovation. Together, efficient use and diverse dispersed renewable supply are starting to flip the whole electricity sector on its head. Traditionally, of course, utilities build giant coal and nuclear plants, then big gas plants, then maybe a little efficiency in renewables. And those utilities were rewarded, as they still are in 36 states, for selling you more electricity. But now, especially where regulators instead reward cutting your bills, the market is shifting massively towards efficiency, renewables, cogeneration, and ways to blend them all together reliably using less transmission and little or no bulk electricity storage. So our energy future is not fate but choice, and that choice is very flexible. In 1976, for example, government and industry all insisted that the energy needed to make a dollar of GDP could never go down. I heretically suggested it could drop several-fold. That's what happened by twofold so far. And yet today's far more powerful technologies, integrative design, and maturing delivery channels can save even more, even faster and cheaper. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it. The results may at first seem incredible, but as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets need protection. Big discoveries are protected by public incredulity. These best buys also happen to be the most effective solutions to some bigger problems: climate change, nuclear proliferation, energy insecurity, and energy poverty. So now combine the electricity and oil revolutions and the strong efficiency underlying them, and you have the really big story, reinventing fire, where business, enabled and sped by smart policies in mindful markets, can lead the United States completely off oil and coal, these wedges down here, by 2050, saving $5 trillion, growing the economy 2.6-fold, strengthening our national security, and by eliminating the oil and coal, reducing fossil carbon emissions by 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any of those outcomes, you can support reinventing fire without needing to agree about which outcome is more important. That is, focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to America's energy challenge. Our team helps smart companies to get unstuck and to speed this journey. Of course, there's still a lot of old thinking around too. As Oilman Marie Strong once said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But as DuPont's former chairman Edgar Woolard reminded us, firms hampered by old thinking won't be a problem because they simply won't be around long term. What I've described is not just a once-in-a-civilization business opportunity. It's one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species. We humans are inventing a new fire, not dug from below, but flowing from above. Not scarce but bountiful, not local but everywhere, not transient but permanent, not costly but free. But for a little biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless. Efficiently used, it really can make energy do our work without working our undoing. Each of you owns a piece of that $5 trillion prize, and our book, Reinventing Fire, details how each of you can capture that opportunity. So with the conversation just begun at reinventingfire.com, let me now invite you to engage with us at Rocky Mountain Institute and with each other to help make the world richer, fairer, cooler, and safer by reinventing fire. Thank you.
So I think Amory's prepared to take some questions. Please raise your hand. We've got mics here to run to you. Let us know who you are, and sharp, pointed, focused questions, please.
Sir.
Hi, Chris Halpin, Celtic Energy. Thank you for everything you do. What an inspiration.
Thank you.
What do you think we need to do at our federal level to make this happen? Because it's a huge issue, and there's a lot of disbelievers and naysayers, ignorant as they may be in certain respects. What can we do?
Now, notice I didn't say no policy innovation was required. We do actually need some to either unlock or enable or to speed the transition I described. We just didn't find any that required an act of Congress. They can be done federally at an administrative level, or they can be done at a state level, which is where we regulate almost all our utility activity anyway. So everything I described could be done federally or by the states where they have the jurisdiction, like utility commissions. You could do, for example, auto fee bates federally, or you could do them at a state or regional level. For example, this is one of the states, one of the 16 that cooperates with California under the Clean Air Act. California is seriously considering fee bates. They actually passed them by a 7-to-1 margin 30-odd years ago, and it got pocket vetoed because people hadn't quite done their homework with the automakers first. But now that we have worked with the automakers on how to design fee bates properly, and now that California still has over 3-to-1 support for the concept, that could well happen, and Connecticut could actually lead that. And by the way, if we had fee bates in California plus 16, that's 2/5 of the national auto market. That's enough to swing the whole thing. Decoupling and shared savings, that is rewarding utilities for cutting your bill, not selling more energy, is really a state prerogative. However, we do need federal action preferably, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has been moving very consistently in this direction to get pricing transparency, to have to form bigger and faster markets that clear maybe every 5 or 10 minutes instead of hourly or daily, and to make sure that there is full and fair competition. For example, there's only 13 states now in which efficiency and demand response are allowed to compete against the supply side. This is stupid. Everything ought to compete so we can choose the best buys. There is fortunately a lot of wonderful military leadership on both resilient electric supplies and efficiency, and that is a federal activity, and I think you'll find such a strong consensus around it that it isn't much interfered with by present politics, because it's really about operational readiness and effectiveness and saving money and lives. We've had over 1,000 service members now killed in convoy attacks, mostly hauling fuel that's mostly wasted, and the combatant commanders take that very seriously. But I don't think it's necessary to have federal consensus. The few things that need to be done by federal regulation are all administrative. We have found only one trivial exception. You would forego I think it's 0.3 million barrels a day of heavy truck savings by 2050 if you were not able to get an act of Congress harmonizing highway heavy truck rules on size and weight between federal and state highways. But that's only 1/10 of the maximum biofuels you might need anyway, so it's not really important whether we do that or not. It would just be really good for trucking industry, for reducing road wear and improving safety. So I think Washington will do whatever it does, and there's no need to wait. Again, let this be enabled by policy at an appropriate and accountable level, but led by business for profit. That's the most dynamic force in our society. That's where big change can go to scale. Yes?
Hi, my name is Elisa. I was wondering how you arrived at the deadline of 2050. It's a nice round number, but why not, 30, 40, 60? And how realistic is that considering past progress? Maybe you could explain that a little bit.
If 2050 turned out to be about how long it would take to complete this change, if the rates of adoption already achieved in the leading states were achieved nationwide over the next 20-odd to 30 years, which we thought was a reasonable ramp-up rate. And we have taken full account of the lags for retooling, retraining, and so on. I think we could do it a bit faster than that. but it is a round number. Actually, the federal forecasts, which were our base case, end in 2035. So we had to extrapolate those to get a base case to 2050 to compare with and get our prices from. But since it's just a turn the crank model anyway, that's a pretty accurate method. But there's nothing magic about the number, and of course, we need to get started now. I think we already have, whether we realize it or not. Someone once asked Dana Meadows, do we have enough time to get out of this mess? And she correctly answered, we have exactly enough time starting now. Or as Bill McDonough says, negligence begins tomorrow. Ma'am.
Cynthia Parker. Regarding buildings, what can you say about geothermal interior climate control in terms of helping toward your goal?
Well, in good sites with good technique, and you have to do it right and watch out for corrosion and sediment and all that other stuff, geothermal heat pumps are a legitimate technique. In general, it may be an even better deal to super insulate the buildings so they don't need heating or cooling. And this is now a pretty common practice in Europe. I mentioned the 32,000 passive buildings there that don't need heat and have about normal construction costs, but there are also many passive buildings now that are retrofitted. 100-year-old Viennese apartment houses, half-timbered Elizabethan houses. You know, a lot of historic buildings are super insulated, or if they're not listed, if they're these drab stucco things, you can super outsulate them and build a tea cozy around them. And that is being done cost effectively in climates similar to or worse than yours, southern Sweden, for example. So I think this is the next revolution in building technique, and it takes a lot of skill, especially in air tightening, but those skills have been rapidly built up in Europe, led by Germany. You know, when we led the greening of the White House, that was about as historic a building as we have. And some of the windows were so old, they were not just rolled glass instead of float glass, they were blown glass. But those made the outer lights of the new super windows, plus some other things the Secret Service wanted and so on. And those super windows work just fine. You can't tell the difference from the outside. So I think this is a lot of good skilled work to be done over decades, and I would generally prioritize it over the mechanical solutions. It's usually cheaper even in retrofit to try to get rid of mechanicals rather than make them more complicated. So geothermal works, you'd have to analyze whether it's the best buy. Jake?
Jake Seligman, FES. I was just curious about your electricity projections and you said we need to, in order to make that dispatch model work, it needs to be orchestrated intelligently. And I'm just curious about what specifically you envision happening at maybe the ISO level or even at the utility level to actually make that happen.
Well, there's nothing magic about this. When the West Danish grid first tried this, or contemplated the idea actually, it took them about 7 years to get comfortable with it. They thought originally you could only do maybe 3 to 5% variable renewables without the lights going off. And then 10, and then 15, and then 20, and then 25. You know, now in a normal wind year, Denmark, well, as of 2010, it had the capacity to be 36% renewable, 26 of which is wind. And they don't see a limit. And Denmark has, under its conservative government, a national policy of getting completely off fossil fuel in all primary energy by 2050 to improve their economy and security. And they figured out how to make it almost entirely self-financing. It's quite a good deal. It's already helping their economy, not only in having powerful export industries, but in reducing their exposure to volatile fuel prices. So the changes are actually some technological, but much more cultural and institutional. And we're actually embarking on some exercises within the electricity industry to speed up that learning. We had, for example, an interesting case a couple of years ago. We were working with a very large and renowned utility that's mainly nuclear and coal. And they thought you could only do 2 or 3% variable renewables without the lights going out. And we surmised that this might perhaps be an organizational learning problem. Yes, indeed. It turns out they did their dispatch models on stuff that runs on a mainframe overnight and gives you reams of numbers you can't understand. So we introduced them to our Mac model that produced this. It runs in 15 seconds and produces color graphics, so you can actually see how the moving parts fit together. And after a few weeks of guided play with this, the utility's head of strategy, formerly head of operations, a respected nuclear engineer, stood up in front of the executive group and said, you know, you're not going to believe this, but this is what we found. I'm perfectly comfortable now. We can do 30 to 50% variable renewables. That's not an upper bound. That's just as far as we analyzed. It just means operating our existing assets in a different way that is much closer to classical economic dispatch. It respects all of our ramp rates and maintenance schedules and so on. We will have better reliability out of it, and we may well make more money on it. That's the kind of shift in thinking that happens when you have the right tools to understand how this new choreography can work. And of course, we have to do a lot of fixing up of the grid because we have obsolete, distribution controls. We have to make it secure. We have to automate it. We have to make it bidirectional. That stuff's happening anyway. Real-time pricing is really helpful. Bigger and faster clearing markets would be essential. But this is not difficult. It's just different. And it's a lot easier than not doing it and continuing to cope with the cascading blackout and other kinds of really scary problems that we have right now that we have to grow our way out of. Sir.
Thanks, Amory. I had the pleasure of also hearing you at Greenbuild and then read most of your book. I was just curious, agriculture, which is a huge user of fossil fuel, where do you put them in the mix?
We actually did quite a lot of research on that, which my colleagues persuaded me to largely take out of the book. It was about one thing too many. But that's a much longer conversation and a very important one, partly because quite a lot of agricultural trace gas is important to climate, partly because we're ruining a lot of our soil fertility or losing a lot of our soil, partly because of water, partly because of food, of the narrowness of the crop base, genetics, and so on. Generally, I think where the analysis points is that natural systems agriculture that looks and acts more like ecosystems is much more likely to succeed ecologically and economically than very input-intensive and essentially fragile or unresilient agriculture. And the more climate changes, the more that becomes the case. Also, there are some important structural changes we need to make for other reasons. For example, there's now an important public health coalition emerging to ban the prophylactic use of feedlot antibiotics, and that would, I think, put conventional feedlots and other intensive rearing methods out of business and require more humane and ecologically sensible methods, which do not actually have to cost more. I live, for example, in western Colorado, whose traditional ranching economy was organic cow-calf operations. They ate grass. That's what they're designed for. The only reason that that isn't flourishing now, especially with all the concerns about prions and stuff, is that USDA has refused to put inspectors on the western slope that would make it legal to run an abattoir there. And by the time you ship your critter over the Continental Divide and back, it costs too much. But that's not a necessary problem. That's a fairly simple regulatory obstacle. I think probably reform of the beef system is the biggest lever in the world for improving the healthfulness of our food and the economy of a lot of our rural areas. It's a longer story than that, but perhaps that's a start. Sir?
Jay runs the Hartford in Hartford, Connecticut. It sounds to me that the description that you make is that we're probably already on this glide path to get to the desired state in 2050 because once and all the pieces are already there, private sector just has to take into account those economic indicators and do what it does. I guess my question is, what do you see as potential things that would intervene to inhibit that and to block getting to that end state in 2050?
Well, I suppose if we have an attack of the stupids, we could keep increasing runaway subsidies. We're in a subsidy arms race on stuff that cannot compete in the market. I think given the fiscal climate, that's not very likely, that we are more likely to come to our senses and start running the subsidy arms rates backwards towards zero. And instead of adding subsidies, take them away in a reasonably balanced fashion. I could actually enjoy a televised hearing in which a number of sworn energy executives are in front of a legislative committee that pulls out a new unbiased GAO CBO report we need, advised by, say, Doug Koplow at earthlink.net, who really understands subsidies. And they'd say, Mr. Jones, it looks like your industry got $11 billion from this subsidy last year, and Mr. Smith, you seem to have gotten about $8 billion from. Oh, but Senator, those aren't subsidies. Oh, so you wouldn't mind if we took them away, would you? That's how you tell if they're subsidies. And I think people who really do care about competition and free markets could have a lot of fun smoking out the corporate socialists and free marketeers' clothing. I think whatever political belief system you have, that would be a good thing. And if we want to get our taxes down, that's a pretty good start. There are likely to be some bad things happening in the world which could cause us to respond stupidly. Again, the more people understand what's actually happening in the energy transition I've described, the less likely we are to go off on bizarre adventures pursuing somebody's favorite technology that they say is essential. And I wrote a piece some years ago called Drilling in All the Wrong Places, which is on rmi.org, describing in two very terse pages, maybe it's just one, why conservatives should be particularly offended by this nutty idea of drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, because the oil there is insecure, uncompetitive, uneconomic, and unnecessary. And for a conservative, those are particularly dirty words, rightly so. That thesis is not yet widely known, but you might ask yourself, why are none of the oil majors in the least interested in oil from that source? Because it's grotesquely uneconomic and risky, and it's about the last thing they'd ever be interested in. They've made that very clear. Way in the back.
Quickly, could you just comment on global hydrofracking technology and how that'll impact on the marketplace and maybe the hidden costs involved?
Yeah, well, a lot of parts of the world do have tight and shale gas that could be fracked, although not perhaps as easily as some here. Fracking generically, of course, is not a new technique. The way it's being applied mixed with horizontal drilling in those shales has many fundamental uncertainties. Some of them are about the long-term producibility profile, some about the underlying gas economics. If you take away the oil, light sweet crude oil byproduct that's driving a lot of the early plays and the use it or lose it leases that are driving rather frenetic drilling of late. Some are around induced seismicity, earthquake issues. some are around water use, water contamination, local site impacts. There's a lot of stuff that we need to sort out. It'll take probably a decade to resolve those uncertainties. If they resolve favorably, we'll be glad we have that additional resource. If we don't, we won't be too disappointed because we won't need most of that gas anyway. The main effect internationally will be to decouple gas from oil prices. Quite a lot of the gas price, maybe a third of it in the world, is already or is still contractually tied to oil price, which is nutty, and that's going to strain and break. And I think it's probably not very good news for Gazprom, which might change Russian behavior about gas as a political tool. So yeah, we're in for interesting times. And of course, the gas market's already roiled by events in Japan. But I think it's an interesting example of many of how the hydrocarbon industries have extraordinary skills, and their assets and capabilities will be very useful in the new world in a number of perhaps unexpected ways. And the hydrocarbon they have in the ground, the hydrogen in it will be worth more without the carbon than with the carbon, even without carbon pricing. They'll make more money taking hydrogen out in reformers than putting more in refineries. Now, there will be a number of interesting surprises, but those industries could have a bright future. Gas could be a useful transitional fuel, and ultimately in a few decades after 2050, I expect we'll get largely off gas as a fuel, and it will remain a very useful feedstock. Our analysis was only about fuels, not feedstocks. Not the molecular use, only the combustion use. And fossil fuels are really good feedstocks, and they'll have to compete with the biofeedstocks.
Amory, thank you very much. I think we should continue the conversation outside the door in a more informal way, but It's really a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.